Safety is supposed to wear a badge. A patrol car's blue lights should make a city breathe easier. But in Irkutsk, Russia, for nearly 2 decades, those lights guided women straight into the path of a monster. Mikhail Popkov wasn't a drifter, a stranger, or a shadow lurking in alleys. He was a decorated police officer, a man neighbors waved to a man, fellow officers trusted a man whose uniform should have symbolized protection. Yet beneath that calm, disciplined exterior lived a hatred so deep, so corrosive, that it transformed him into one of the most prolific serial killers in modern history. Popkov was born in 1964 inches, the small industrial town of Angarsk. His childhood should have been ordinary, but it wasn't. His mother's infidelity carved a wound into him, a wound that over time hardened into contempt, then disgust, and eventually a twisted belief that some women deserved to die. No one knew that the resentment fermenting inside him would one day spill onto the frozen streets of Siberia. In the early 1990s, post-Soviet Russia was collapsing, corruption was rampant, police departments were underfunded, crime was everywhere, and amid the confusion, Popkov discovered he had the perfect camouflage his uniform. Night after night in the bitter cold, he cruised through Irkutsk in his police car. To the public, that car meant safety. To the women he approached often late at night alone, leaving bars, the flashing badge meant help. It never crossed their minds that this officer offering a ride home was the last person they would ever see. He used the tools of his profession, his authority, his patrol car, even police-issued weapons, to isolate and overpower his victims. He drove them toward forest edges, abandoned lots riverbanks where footsteps vanished into snow. There, miles from witnesses or light, he released years of suppressed rage. He left bodies in ditches, woods, and frozen fields, then returned home to quietly kiss his wife goodnight. For years, fear spread through Irkutsk like frost. Women vanished. Bodies appeared mutilated. Locals whispered about a creature haunting the outskirts, a man they called the werewolf. What no one realized was that the monster was attending police briefings about his own murders. Investigators pored over files, and Popkov sat beside them, calm, attentive, offering suggestions. He walked through crime scenes with a notebook in hand, standing just inches from the evidence of his own brutality. His confidence grew with each body they failed to trace back to him. Only one victim survived barely. She remembered almost nothing except the smell of a police uniform. It was the first crack in his mask. By 2012, police finally had DNA linking multiple victims to a member of the force. Quietly, discreetly, they collected samples from hundreds of officers. When they approached Popkov, he didn't hesitate. He smiled. He believed the system he served would never turn on him. He was wrong. The DNA match detonated through the department like a bomb. The werewolf wasn't a rumor. He was one of their own. Popkov was arrested while vacationing, and he didn't resist. Sitting in interrogation, he leaned forward politely, as though reviewing paperwork rather than confessing to massacre. He first admitted to 22 murders. Then, the number climbed. 56 more confessed in 2018. More again in 2021. Even additional confessions in 2023. Investigators now believe he killed at least 80 women, possibly more, enough to make him one of the deadliest serial killers in Russian history. What unsettled detectives wasn't just the brutality, it was his tone. He corrected them on details: which knife he used, which victim fought back, which weapon matched, which wound, with the precision of a clerk updating files. When asked why he did it, he said simply, "I was cleansing the streets." His wife and daughter refused to believe it. They had family photos, smiling, vacations, holidays, memories of a man they thought they knew. When the truth settled in, his wife reportedly destroyed every image of him in their home. She realized the man she'd loved never existed. In court, Popkov looked like a statue, rigid, expressionless, unbroken police posture. The only time he spoke was to correct the record. No remorse, no apology, no recognition of the devastation he caused. In 2015, he received life imprisonment in a Siberian maximum security colony, the same wilderness where he once dumped his victims. In 2018, another life sentence. He will die there. The cold, silent landscape he once used as a graveyard has become his cage. But the most painful legacy he left behind wasn't just the bodies. It was the betrayal. When a killer hides in forests, the city fears the dark. But when a killer hides behind a badge, the city fears everything. And in Irkutsk, decades later, that betrayal still echoes louder than sirens. Some killers crave attention. Some want fame, a nickname, a legacy carved into fear. But Israel Keys wanted the opposite. He wanted silence, clean, controlled, absolute silence. He wasn't driven by rage, obsession, or impulse. He was driven by planning, by discipline, by the cold, terrifying satisfaction of a perfect crime. To investigators, he remains one of the most chilling predators the United States has ever faced, not because of how much he killed, but because of how little he left behind. Israel Keys was born in 1,978 inches, Utah, into a world already isolated from the rest of society. His family lived deep in the woods of Washington state, completely off the grid, no electricity, no neighbors, no school, no outside influences. His childhood was shaped by silence, strict religious ideology, and a gnawing sense of being different. He knew early that he felt something no one else around him seemed to understand: the desire for control. As a teenager, he graduated from killing animals to breaking into homes, not for money, but for the thrill of entering someone else's world, unnoticed. He once said he didn't see these impulses as sickness, he saw them as purpose. After serving in the U.S. Army in the late 1992, Keys built the kind of life that fools everyone. He moved to Alaska, started a construction business, had a daughter, and blended seamlessly into his community. Neighbors described him as helpful, polite, a quiet man with a steady routine. But beneath that calm surface, he was engineering a system, a roadmap for murder unlike anything investigators had seen before. Keys didn't kill spontaneously. He created kill kits, buckets filled with guns, zip ties, duct tape, rope, and bottles of Drano to destroy DNA. He buried these kits across the United States in forests, under bridges, near remote rivers. Sometimes he hid them years before he used them. His process was frighteningly methodical. He'd choose a random state, fly there, rent a car under a fake name, drive hundreds of miles to avoid being traced, then select victims at random: a couple camping, a man walking home, a young woman closing a shop. After the murders, he'd scatter evidence and return to Alaska as if nothing had happened. He with no pattern, no victim profile, no location consistency. He murdered purely for the challenge and the satisfaction of never being caught. The only reason the world knows his name today is because of one devastating night in 2012. It was February, bitter cold in Anchorage. 19-year-old barista Samantha Koenig was finishing her shift at a small coffee stand when a masked man approached. Surveillance footage shows her raising her hands, then switching off the lights. Keys had forced his way inside at gunpoint. Samantha vanished. Anchorage froze in fear. Keys took her life soon after abducting her, but what he did next stunned even the most hardened investigators. The next morning, he boarded a cruise ship with his girlfriend and daughter. While Samantha's family searched for her, Keys was on vacation, smiling in photos, blending into crowds, carrying on as though nothing had happened. When he returned, he accessed Samantha's bank account, withdrawing cash across several states to make it appear she was still alive. To sell the illusion, he posed her body to look, living applied makeup, placed a newspaper beside her, and took a photograph he later sent as a ransom demand. It was manipulation on a level that rattled every investigator who saw the image. Police tracked the ATM withdrawals: Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, and in March 2012, a highway patrol officer pulled over a white Ford Focus for speeding. Inside the car were Samantha's debit card, a mask, a gun, and Israel Keys, completely calm. He didn't deny anything. He didn't panic. He negotiated. He told the FBI he would talk, but only under strict conditions: no media, no public attention, no long trial. He wanted a swift execution. Even in custody, he demanded control. Over months of interviews, Keys revealed fragments of his crimes. Never the full story, just enough to taunt, just enough to maintain power. He admitted to at least 11 murders, but hinted at many more. Investigators discovered an eerie drawing in his jail cell: 11 crude skulls sketched in his own blood, believed to represent his victims. He criticized other serial killers like Bundy and BTK, calling them sloppy. He wanted to design the perfect puzzle, a series of murders with no connections, no common threads, nothing for investigators to follow. The truth is terrifying. There may be dozens of victims who will never be found and whose families will never know what happened. On December 2, 2012, Israel Keys took the one thing he had left to control his own life. He slit his wrists and strangled himself with bedding inside his Anchorage jail cell. He left behind a handwritten note, not a confession, not remorse, but an unsettling, poetic ramble about darkness, murder, and nothingness. No names, no answers, just silence. The same silence he always wanted. To this day, the FBI continues to investigate unsolved disappearances in states Keyes traveled through. His kill kits, buried across the country, are still being discovered. Israel Keyes didn't hunt for fame. He hunted for perfection. He desired control so complete that even now, years after his death, investigators admit they may never know how many lives he extinguished. He didn't want a legacy. He wanted to disappear. And that is exactly what makes him one of the most terrifying killers America has ever known. Alaska is a place where nature dominates everything. A land of towering mountains, icy rivers, and a wilderness so vast it can swallow a person whole. It's a place where hunters are legends, and in the 1,970 seconds through the early 80 seconds, one hunter walked among them with a secret far darker than anyone imagined. His name was Robert Hansen, but history remembers him by another title, the Butcher Baker, a man who transformed the Alaskan frontier into his personal hunting preserve, where the prey wasn't animals, it was women. Hansen's story begins far from Alaska, in a small town in Iowa in 1939. Shy, frail, and plagued by a severe stutter and acne, he spent his childhood being mocked and bullied. While other boys played confidently in schoolyards, Hansen found refuge alone in the woods. His weapon of comfort was his father's rifle. Shooting gave him something he'd never felt before: precision, power, control. But resentment grew inside him like a bruise that never healed. He fantasized not just about hunting animals, but about revenge. In adulthood, Hansen seemed to leave those insecurities behind. He moved to Anchorage in the late 1,960 seconds, opened a bakery, married, became a father, and built the image of a quiet, hard-working family man. To neighbors, he was polite. To the church, he was dependable. To customers, he was warm and helpful. No one saw the rage still burning beneath his calm demeanor, a rage directed at the same kind of women who once rejected him. He began preying on dancers and sex workers along Anchorage's nightlife, strip women who were often isolated, transient, and unlikely to be immediately missed if they disappeared. To them, Hansen appeared harmless, short, soft-spoken, unthreatening. He lured many with promises of money, opportunities, or flights on his private plane. Yes, Hansen owned his own bush plane, and that aircraft became the tool that enabled his horrors. After gaining their trust, he would take victims to remote areas, secluded riverbanks, thick forests, rugged gravel strips hidden deep within Alaska's untamed wilderness. There, everything changed. He chained them inside a remote cabin, where the terror began days of violence and psychological torture. Then, the most chilling part of his ritual unfolded. Hansen released them into the forest, gave them a head start, and hunted them down with a rifle, tracking them like game. It was cruelty so cold and calculated that it still haunts investigators decades later. For years, hikers and hunters stumbled across shallow graves in the Alaskan wild, decomposed bodies scattered across remote terrain. Most were too damaged or decomposed to identify. Whispers began circling Anchorage. There was a predator among them, someone the media would later call the Butcher Baker. But Robert Hansen continued living his double life effortlessly, delivering pastries at sunrise while burying victims at midnight. The case finally cracked open in 1983 when a young woman named Cindy Paulson escaped him. Hansen had kidnapped her, handcuffed her, and taken her to his plane at the Merrill Field Airport. But while he prepared for takeoff, Cindy seized her moment. Barefoot, half-naked and chained, she sprinted across the tarmac until a passing truck driver rescued her. Police were skeptical at first. How could the respected baker, church-going friendly, a skilled hunter, be capable of something so monstrous? But Cindy's story was too detailed, too vivid, too precise about the plane, the cabin, and the terror she endured. Anchorage detectives brought in the FBI, including legendary profiler John Douglas, who analyzed the murders. His conclusions stunned investigators. The killer was an experienced hunter, socially awkward, likely married, and respected within the community. Every detail pointed directly to Robert Hansen. When police searched Hansen's home, the facade finally cracked. Hidden in his property, they found jewelry belonging to missing women, firearms matching the killings, restraints and ropes, and a map, a horrifying map. Behind Hansen's headboard, investigators discovered a hand-drawn map of the Alaskan wilderness marked with 24 small X's. Each X represented a burial site. It was the killer's scorecard. Confronted with the overwhelming evidence, Hansen confessed in 1984. He admitted to 17 murders and 30 sexual assaults, though many believe the true number may be higher. He described the kill without emotion, explaining step by step how he hunted his victims. He said the thrill wasn't in the kill, it was in the pursuit. Even seasoned detectives said it was one of the most disturbing interrogations they had ever conducted. In court, Hansen appeared meek and quiet, a stark contrast to the predator he truly was. When sentenced to life in prison, plus 461 years, he barely reacted. Over the next 3 decades, Hansen lived out his days in Spring Creek Correctional Center, one of Alaska's toughest prisons. He died in 2014 at age 75, taking countless secrets with him. Some of the women he buried have never been identified. Their stories lie forever in Alaska's frozen soil. The people of Anchorage still remember how ordinary he appeared, the man serving cinnamon rolls in the morning while imagining his next hunt by night. Because Hansen did what many believe impossible. He turned one of the most beautiful places on earth into a killing field. A city can feel safe, even when danger stands in the daylight. Toronto's Church Wellesley Village, the heart of Canada's LGBTQ+ community, was supposed to be one of those safe havens. A place built from decades of struggle, where people finally felt seen, accepted, and free. But between 2010 and 2017, men began to vanish. They weren't nameless drifters or tourists simply passing through. They were beloved sons, partners, friends, men deeply rooted in the community. No bodies, no witnesses, no signs of struggle, just disappearances that felt like people had dissolved into thin air. For years, police insisted there was no serial killer. For years, the community insisted there was. The truth, it was living right among them, pruning shrubs, mowing lawns, watering flowers. A man whose smile was neighborly, whose job was ordinary, whose secret was monstrous. His name was Bruce McArthur. McArthur was born in 1,951 inches, rural Ontario. He grew up on a farm under strict rules where affection was rare and expectations were high. As a young adult, he married, raised children, and lived what appeared to be a stable suburban life. But beneath that exterior, he struggled with his identity. By his 42nd, his marriage collapsed. He came out as gay and relocated to Toronto's vibrant gay village, hoping to start a new chapter. He fit in easily. He smiled often. He dressed neatly. He became a Santa Claus impersonator at the mall during the holidays, a gentle, comforting figure in a red suit. No one looked at Bruce McArthur and saw a predator. He worked as a landscaper, driving a van filled with soil, mulch, and tools. Clients adored him. He tended their gardens with care and buried his darkest secrets inside them. McArthur targeted vulnerable men, many immigrants, refugees, or men who weren't fully out yet. Most came from South Asian or Middle Eastern backgrounds. Some were new to Canada, had limited support networks, or were hesitant to report anything to police. He met them through dating apps, bars, or social circles in the village. His charm made him seem trustworthy. His age made him appear safe. But once they entered his apartment, the line between trust and danger vanished. Each disappearance followed the same chilling pattern. A man stopped answering his phone, stopped showing up to work, stopped posting on social media. Their absence lingered, without explanation, and without bodies, police struggled to act. Families begged for answers. Activists raised alarms. But without evidence, cases went cold. And as the village pleaded for help, McArthur tended his clients' gardens, planters overflowing with soil, and vibrant flowers disguising the horror hidden beneath. The case finally began to unravel, thanks to a man named Andrew Kinsman, missing since June 2017. His disappearance felt different, louder, more alarming, because Andrew was well known in the community. His friends refused to let the case fade. Detectives uncovered one crucial clue. In McArthur's day planner, on the day Andrew vanished, a single word was written: Bruce. It was the spark investigators needed. In January 2018, police executed a search warrant on McArthur's Toronto apartment. What they found was the nightmare the community had feared for years. On his computer were hundreds of photographs of men, some alive, some clearly not, images documenting death, images kept as trophies. But the most horrifying discovery lay outside the apartment, scattered across Toronto, in the yards of McArthur's landscaping clients. Large, heavy planters, filled with soil and flowers. Inside them were human remains carefully wrapped, hidden in plain sight, and left to blend with the gardens he lovingly maintained. Crime scene teams excavated dozens of properties, lifting planters into trucks, sifting through soil, searching every corner of each yard. Bit by bit, they identified 8 victims, confirming what the community had known all along. There had been a serial killer in their midst, and he had been waving to them, smiling as he pruned roses. Public anger exploded. For years, voices from the LGBTQ+ community had warned something terrible was happening, and for years they felt unheard. Police defended their earlier investigations, but the trust was damaged maybe permanently. When the case reached court, the evidence was overwhelming. MacArthur didn't fight it. On the 29th of January 2019, he pled guilty to 8 counts of first-degree murder. As prosecutors laid out the brutality of his actions, survivors and victims' families listened in silence, some crying, some shaking, all united in grief and disbelief. MacArthur kept souvenirs from his victims, photographs, jewelry, personal items, reminders of the lives he stole. The judge sentenced him to life in prison with no chance of parole for 25 years. Due to his age, that effectively meant he would die behind bars. In prison, he lives quietly. He reads. He tends a small garden in the courtyard under constant supervision, of course. The planters there are monitored. None will ever hide secrets again. The terror MacArthur inflicted wasn't just in the murders themselves, but in the betrayal wrapped around them. A man trusted by the community, embraced by neighbors, photographed with children at Christmas, was burying victims in flower pots. He didn't operate in shadows. He operated in sunlight, the kind that makes you believe you're safe. That's what makes his crimes unforgettable. He proved that sometimes evil doesn't lurk in darkness. Sometimes it waters your plants. In the villages of North Sumatra, Indonesia, mysticism is woven into everyday life. People visit shamans for blessings, healing, luck, or protection from misfortune. Magic isn't a fantasy, it's a tradition, a belief passed down for generations. But in the 1,990 seconds, one shaman twisted that trust into something unimaginable. A man who claimed to bring fortune while secretly burying women in the soil beneath his feet. His name was Ahmad Suraji, though locals called him Datuk, a title of respect for a spiritual guide. But behind that name was a killer who confessed to murdering 42 women, claiming his victims were part of a ritual commanded by the spirit of his dead father. He is remembered now as the sorcerer of Sumatra, one of the most chilling killers Southeast Asia has ever known. Suraji was born in 1949 near Medan, the largest city on the island of Sumatra. Like many boys in the region, he grew up around traditional healing practices, charms, incantations, rituals whispered at night. His father was a respected healer, and young Ahmad watched closely as villagers came for remedies and blessings. But unlike his father, Ahmad didn't want to heal. He wanted power, unquestioned, absolute power. And he learned quickly that fear could get him what respect could not. As he grew older, he established himself as a dukun, a local shaman, performing rituals to attract wealth, beauty, or love. Villagers believed in him. They confided in him. They led him into their most vulnerable hopes. What they didn't know was that he was already building a fantasy one, rooted not in spirituality, but in deadly obsession. According to his later confession, Suraji claimed that one night he had a vision. His deceased father appeared to him, telling him that to achieve the highest level of mystical power, he had to kill 70 women and drink their saliva. Whether he truly believed this or used it as a story to justify his crimes will never be known. But from that moment forward, the killings began. Suraji targeted women from all walks of life: farmers, shopkeepers, housewives, students. Some were poor, others relatively well off, but all came to him willingly, seeking blessings or rituals meant to improve their lives. He instructed each woman to wear white clothing, the color of purity, and to arrive at his home at night when he claimed spirits were most receptive. He then led them to a vast sugarcane field behind his house. The moonlit rows of tall cane stalks hid everything: footsteps, whispers, pleas for mercy. Suraji told his victims that standing in a shallow hole would enhance spiritual energy. When they stepped inside with the earth rising around their waists, they were trapped. Then he wrapped a cloth around their necks and strangled them. After they died, he performed an eerily structured ritual. He buried them right there in the sugarcane field, leaving only their heads above the soil as he recited incantations. Finally, he covered their faces with dirt, extinguishing their last connection to the world. He repeated this ritual over 40 times. Shockingly, he didn't act alone. one of his 3 wives, all of whom were sisters, helped lure victims believing the rituals were real. Fear, loyalty, or manipulation kept her silent. For years, women vanished across the region. Some families suspected wrongdoing, but many chalked the disappearances up to runaways or spiritual misfortune. Investigations were rare. Reports were sporadic. Police were stretched thin. And in that silence, Suraji thrived. Everything unraveled in 1997. A young woman went to visit Suraji for a ritual and never returned. Her father, refusing to accept that she had disappeared, willingly reported her missing. Local police traced her last known destination to Suraji's home. When officers arrived, an unmistakable smell drifted from the sugarcane fields, a thick, rotting scent rising from the earth. What they unearthed was a graveyard. Body after body buried just beneath the soil, their remains hidden only by layers of cane and secrecy. 42 victims were eventually recovered. Suraji was arrested and brought to the Medan police station. At first he denied everything, but surrounded by evidence and perhaps satisfied that his story would be remembered, he confessed. He described his crimes, calmly correcting officers when they misstated dates or details. He explained how he chose victims, how he buried them, how he believed drinking their saliva granted mystical strength. His lack of remorse chilled investigators. He spoke as though explaining a job he had completed, nothing more. The trial in 1998 drew massive crowds. Journalists from around the world packed the courtroom. People wanted to see the man behind the legend, a figure they hoped would look like a monster. But instead, they saw a mild-mannered man in a plain white shirt, smiling faintly as the charges were read. He was found guilty of 42 counts of murder and sentenced to death by firing squad. One of his wives received a life sentence as an accomplice. When asked if he feared dying, Suraji replied, "I will return. The spirits will guide me." On the 10th of July, 2008, he faced his executioners in a remote field at dawn. He reportedly looked at them without fear, his eyes open, until the final moment. And just like that, the sorcerer of Sumatra's final ritual came to an end. But the question he leaves behind continues to echo through villages and police files alike. Was it superstition that created him, or a man who used superstition to hide the darkness he always carried? In the early 1990s, Ukraine was a country standing on shaking ground. The Soviet Union had collapsed, factories were abandoned, villages struggled to survive, and police forces were underfunded and overwhelmed. Chaos lived everywhere, in empty houses, in hungry streets, in dark corners, where people whispered about a future that felt uncertain. But amidst that instability, one man found opportunity. He wasn't just a murderer. He was a force of destruction, unpredictable, merciless, and relentless. A man whose brutality would make him one of the deadliest in modern European history. His name was Anatoly Onoprienko. The media gave him another name, the Terminator. And for good reason. Anatoly was born in 1959 inches, a small village near Zhytomyr. Tragedy found him young. His mother died when he was just 4. Unable to cope, his father abandoned him to an orphanage. Those institutions, cold and unforgiving, shaped him. He learned early that vulnerability was punished and cruelty was rewarded. He wasn't nurtured, he was hardened. As he grew older, he drifted across Eastern Europe, working odd jobs, never staying long in one place. His early crimes were small theft, arson, breaking into houses. But these weren't acts of desperation, they were acts of destruction. He didn't rob for money. He didn't burn for revenge. He destroyed because destruction made him feel powerful. By 1989, he escalated to murder. A family of 10 was found slaughtered in their home, parents, children, relatives all wiped out in one night. Police assumed it was a robbery gone wrong, but the violence was too deliberate, too excessive to be simple theft. The investigation stalled, and Onoprienko vanished. He resurfaced 6 years later. This time, he didn't hide in shadows. He didn't pick isolated individuals. He targeted entire families specifically because he wanted no witnesses left alive. From 1995 to 1996, he carved a trail of fear across Ukraine. His method was as simple as it was horrifying. He chose a remote home. He broke in at night. He carried a shotgun. He killed everyone inside, parents, children, even infants. Then he set the house on fire and moved on. No pattern of victims, no personal connection, just pure annihilation. One night, he murdered a family of 5. Another night, he killed strangers on the road for no reason at all. He drifted constantly, crossing regional borders, always staying one step ahead of authorities. Ukraine, still struggling to build new systems after the fall of the Soviet Union, had no centralized database and limited investigative resources. Communication between regions was slow, and Onoprienko exploited those weaknesses perfectly. The country fell into panic. Villagers locked their doors for the first time in generations. Rumors spread. Some said he was possessed. Others claimed he was a military experiment, a demon or a ghost, traveling from house to house. But the truth was worse. He was just a man driven by hatred and hunger for destruction. By early 1996, his body count reached 52 people, including entire families wiped out in minutes. The government launched one of the largest manhunts in Ukrainian history. Thousands of officers searched forests, villages, and abandoned homes. For months, nothing worked, until one mistake gave him away. In April 1996, police stopped a suspicious man carrying a shotgun and stolen items linked to one of the murdered families. His name, Anatoly Onoprienko. When investigators searched his apartment, they found a collection of horrors, weapons, ammunition, valuables from victims, watches, jewelry, even children's toys. It wasn't just evidence, it was a trophy room. During interrogation, Onoprienko didn't bother pretending. He confessed almost immediately, not hesitantly, but proudly. When asked why he murdered entire households, he said, "When I kill, I am God." He claimed at various times that he acted on divine command. He was cleansing the world. He was chosen. He was fulfilling a mission by. His statements contradicted each other, but one truth remained. He enjoyed the power of destruction. The trial became a national spectacle. Journalists crowded every corner of the courtroom. Families of victims glared at the man who had erased their loved ones from existence. Onoprienko sat calmly, sometimes smiling, sometimes muttering prayers. Psychiatrists examined him and determined he was legally sane, not driven by madness, but by choice and ego. "I am not crazy," he insisted. "I am just different." In 1999, he was sentenced to death, the punishment many believed he deserved. But as Ukraine sought to align itself with European human rights standards, the government commuted all death sentences to life imprisonment. Instead of execution, Onoprienko was locked away in solitary confinement. He spent the rest of his life in isolation, reading the Bible, and claiming spiritual transformation. Yet when journalists visited him in 2006, they found no regret, no empathy, no remorse. "I regret nothing," he said. "I was chosen." Onoprienko died in 2013 at age 54, still imprisoned. His motives remain as fragmented and contradictory as his confessions, but one thing remains painfully clear: he wasn't driven by revenge, poverty, or ideology. He was an orphan who decided the world owed him blood. In the heart of rural China, where wheat fields stretch endlessly and villages sleep in quiet darkness, a nightmare once walked unnoticed. A man with no fame, no record, no traceable pattern, a drifter so ordinary that people barely remembered his face. Yet, between 1999 and 2003, he carried out one of the deadliest killing sprees in world history, slaying 67 people with nothing more than a hammer, a pickaxe, and an insatiable desire to destroy. His name was Yang Xinhai, but villagers would come to know him by a far darker title, the Monster Killer. Yang was born in 1,968 inches, Henan Province, a region defined by farmland, poverty, and hard labor. He was the fourth of 5 children in a family that struggled to survive. His clothes were worn, his shoes often torn, and he carried a look in his eyes that seemed older than his age, tired, distant, quietly observing. By all accounts, Yang was intelligent. But he was also withdrawn, prone to silence, and uninterested in connecting with others. Classmates mocked his poverty. He never fought back. He simply stared at them until they stopped to stare. Many would later claim seemed unnervingly empty. He left school early and drifted through low-paying factory jobs, sleeping in abandoned buildings or cheap dorms. Petty theft followed, then time in prison. And with every arrest, whatever humanity he had left hardened into resentment. Upon his final release in 1999, something in Yang had shifted completely. He no longer wanted to survive in society. He wanted revenge against it. "I wanted to take revenge," he later told investigators. "Society owed me." His killings began quietly in remote farming villages across central China. Places where neighbors trusted one another, where doors remained unlocked, where police stations were miles away, separated by dirt roads and farmland. Unlike most serial killers, Yang had no specific victim type. He targeted entire households at random: a sleeping family, a couple in a brick home, a farmer working late. He entered at night, moving silently across courtyards and through broken doors. Inside, he used blunt weapons, hammers, axes, iron tools to kill swiftly and brutally. When the violence ended, he often stole small valuables: a watch, a radio, a few yuan. But he made one thing clear in every confession: robbery was not the motive. The killing itself was the goal. As the numbers rose, fear gripped the countryside. Villagers barred windows, families slept in shifts, rumors of a demon spread through markets and fields. But no one could describe him. No one had survived him. No one had seen him come or go. He was invisible, except for the devastation left behind. China launched one of the largest manhunts in its modern history. Thousands of officers mobilized across multiple provinces. Roadblocks appeared on rural highways. Drifters were questioned. Sleepy villages were turned inside out by investigators searching for answers. Still, Yang stayed one step ahead. He traveled constantly on foot or by bicycle, drifting through provinces, sleeping wherever he could. His mobility made him almost impossible to track. Each crime scene told the same story: a broken door, blood spattered across walls, bodies of families who never had a chance to wake. No pattern, no motive, no connection, just pure annihilation. His arrest in November 2003 came not through brilliant detective work, but by sheer luck. In Kangzhou, Hebei province, police stopped a suspicious man during a routine ID check. He had no documents. He acted nervous. They fingerprinted him. A match flashed instantly. The man standing before them, thin, quiet, unremarkable, was wanted in multiple provinces for mass murder. It was Yang Xinghai. At first, even officers had difficulty believing it. He looked too ordinary, too calm. But when brought in for questioning, Yang wasted no time with denials. He confessed immediately. He recited dates, locations, weapons, victims, as if reading from memory, not reliving trauma. When asked why he killed entire families, he gave an answer that sent chills through investigators. Killing people is very normal. It's the same as eating or sleeping. There was no remorse, no emotion, just a cold certainty that his actions were justified in his own mind. His trial lasted less than an hour. There were no dramatic speeches, no objections, no attempts to claim insanity. Yang pleaded guilty to 67 murders and 23 attempted murders, making him the deadliest known serial killer in Chinese history. The courtroom remained silent as the sentence was read: death. He showed no reaction. To reporters, he said, "I don't care whether I live or die. It makes no difference to me." On the 14th of February, 2004, Valentine's Day, Yang Xinghai was executed. The next day, Chinese newspapers printed a single stark line: "The monster killer has been put to death." And just like that, he vanished from the world he claimed owed him everything. But the wounds he left behind remain. Families torn apart, villages haunted. A nation forced to confront a question that can never truly be answered. How does a man become nothing but the urge to kill? Hospitals are built on trust. People enter their doors believing they are stepping into safety, into a place where doctors and nurses fight for life, not decide who deserves to keep it. But in Germany between 2000 and 2005, one nurse shattered that trust in a way the country had never seen. His name was Niels Hogel, and he would become known as the most prolific killer in modern German history. Not because he hated his patients, but because he loved the feeling of bringing them back from the edge, a thrill so twisted that he pushed dozens over that edge himself. To him, death was a button he could press. Life was a stage, and he believed he was the hero of every scene. Niels Hogel was born in 1976 inches, Wilhelmshaven, a port city on Germany's northern coast. His father, a respected nurse, was both admired and trusted, a model of compassion and professionalism. Hogel followed in his footsteps, entering the medical field with a reputation for being helpful, upbeat, always willing to lend a hand. Colleagues liked him, supervisors praised him, patients felt safe around him. No one suspected that beneath his easy smile lay a craving for adrenaline, one that would become deadly inside the walls of intensive care units. By his late 20s, Hogel was working at Oldenburg Hospital in intensive care. It was a demanding environment, machines beeping endlessly, emergencies unfolding at unpredictable moments, and staff constantly racing to stabilize the sickest patients. But something stood out, something subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. Whenever Hogel was on shift, patients suffered sudden cardiac arrests at a noticeably higher rate. Beds that had been stable for hours would suddenly erupt in alarms the moment he walked in. And every time he was there, rushing in first defibrillator in hand, performing CPR with dramatic urgency. Colleagues called him a hero. Some even joked he had golden hands because he always seemed to revive people from the brink. The truth was far darker. Hogel was injecting patients with lethal doses of heart medications like ajmaline and lidocaine drugs capable of triggering arrhythmias and cardiac collapse. He created the emergency so he could be the one to end it or save it depending on his mood. Later he described the feeling as an addiction, a rush of power that made him feel alive. Sometimes his patients survived, many didn't. By 2002 deaths at Oldenburg had climbed dramatically. Supervisors noticed. Whispers spread, but instead of investigating or reporting him, the hospital quietly transferred him to a smaller facility in Delmenhorst, a devastating mistake. In Delmenhorst, the same pattern unfolded only faster and deadlier. Cardiac emergencies spiked once again, mortality rates tripled, and still no one intervened. Some doctors defended him, insisting that the patients were already critically ill. Others were afraid to speak up. Some simply couldn't believe a nurse, a caregiver, would deliberately harm those in his care. Their silence allowed him to continue killing. Everything changed in 2005. A colleague walked into a patient's room and found Hogel standing over the bed with a syringe he had no authorization to use. Minutes later, the patient went into cardiac arrest. This time toxicology tests were done. They revealed a drug in the patient's system that had never been prescribed. The illusion of the heroic nurse shattered instantly. Hogel was arrested and charged with attempted murder. During early questioning, he admitted to several other killings almost casually, as though confessing to taking extra shifts instead of taking lives. There are many more, he told investigators. I just can't remember them all. That sentence triggered one of the largest forensic investigations in German history. Authorities exhumed hundreds of bodies across multiple cemeteries. Forensic teams worked meticulously to test tissue samples for traces of the drugs Hogel had used. The results were staggering. Dozens of confirmed killings, dozens more strongly suspected. Investigators now believe Hogel murdered at least 100 patients and possibly more than 300, since many victims had been cremated. He became, by numbers alone, one of the most prolific serial killers in the world. Even when confronted with the evidence, Hogel tried to mask his motives. He first claimed he wanted to end patient suffering, but that excuse never held. Pressure mounted, interrogations intensified, and finally he admitted the truth. He wanted praise. He wanted admiration. He wanted the surge of excitement that came from orchestrating chaos and then restoring order. In other words, he wanted to play God. His first trial, in 2008, resulted in a 15-year sentence for a handful of murders. But as more evidence emerged, prosecutors launched a new investigation. By 2017, Hogel faced charges for 97 murders. Families packed the courtroom, some holding photographs, others clutching letters or hospital bracelets. Their grief filled every corner of the room. Psychiatrists testified that Hogel had narcissistic personality disorder, not insanity, not incompetence, but a pathological need for recognition. In June 2019, the court found him guilty of 85 murders, though investigators maintain the real number is far higher. His sentence, life in prison, with no possibility of parole until at least 2050. Germany's federal court upheld the decision the following year. Today, Niels Hogel lives in near-total isolation, in a high-security prison. He spends his days reading medical textbooks and religious writings, a disturbing irony for a man who weaponized both science and faith in his pursuit of power. Former colleagues refuse to answer his letters. Families still search for closure. Hospitals across Germany changed their internal reporting systems because of him. But the horror he inflicted can't be undone. Because his story isn't just about murder, it is about trust destroyed by the very hands meant to save. South Africa, in the mid-1990 seconds, was a nation reborn. Apartheid had ended. Nelson Mandela had been elected. Hope filled the air, the kind of hope that made people believe the future would finally be different. But beneath that fragile optimism in the crowded townships east of Johannesburg, another story was unfolding. One that whispered through bus stations, markets, factories, and dark alleyways. Women were disappearing not one or two, but dozens. Their bodies were found scattered across fields, roadsides, and abandoned lots. The pattern formed a rough triangle connecting three areas: Atteridgeville, Boksburg, and Cleveland. And from that triangle came a name that would haunt the nation: the ABC Killer. Behind the soft voice and polite smile of the man responsible was someone no one expected: a former orphan, a convicted rapist, a charming manipulator. His name was Moses Sithole. Sithole was born in 1964 inches, Vosloorus, a township outside Johannesburg. From the start, life had been unkind. His father died when he was young, and his mother, overwhelmed by poverty, placed him and his siblings in an orphanage. That orphanage, Sithole later claimed, was a place of constant cruelty, beatings, humiliation, and emotional abandonment, the kind of trauma that doesn't heal but festers. As an adult, he tried to rebuild a normal life. He worked as a miner, then as a security guard. He dressed well, spoke softly, and carried himself with the calm confidence of a man who had survived hardship. But underneath that polished exterior was bitterness, especially toward women. A failed relationship, accusations of infidelity, and unresolved pain fueled a growing rage. In 1987, he was convicted of rape and served 6 years in prison. By the time he was released, any remaining empathy inside him was gone. He had become a predator, searching for purpose. The killings began in 1994, just 1 year after South Africa's first democratic election. The country was celebrating freedom, but law enforcement was fractured, underfunded, and overwhelmed. The perfect storm for someone like Sithole. He crafted a method that relied not on violence at first, but on trust. He approached women in public places, train stations, taxi ranks, bus stops, shopping centers. He spoke with confidence and authority, offering them jobs at a children's charity. Sometimes he even carried fake documents. To struggling women seeking stability, his opportunities sounded like salvation. Once they agreed to follow him, he guided them toward isolated fields or abandoned industrial areas, always within the ABC Triangle. His demeanor shifted instantly. He tied their hands with their own clothing. He assaulted them. He strangled them, often using their underwear as ligatures. Then he vanished, leaving the bodies hidden in tall grass or dirt. One killing became two, two became 10, 10 became dozens. But because victims were marginalized women of color, many from impoverished communities, their disappearances weren't treated with urgency. The killer moved freely through the cracks of a broken system. By late 1995, the pattern was undeniable. Bodies were being discovered in clusters. Forensic teams linked the victims through consistent ligatures, similar injuries, and matching patterns of assault. The press called him the ABC Strangler. Detectives from around the country were pulled into the investigation, including one of South Africa's most respected investigators, Piet Bijleveld. The case grew larger by the day. Witnesses reported seeing a polite, well-dressed man recruiting women under the guise of charity work. And then a break. Several women who had disappeared were last seen with the man connected to an organization called Youth Against Human Abuse. The charity was real, but Sithole had been fired years earlier for theft. Now he was using its name as bait. When police raided his last known residence, they found evidence connecting multiple victims to him. But Sithole had vanished again. Instead of hiding quietly, he taunted authorities. He called journalists. He called investigators. He even admitted his identity over the phone, saying, "You are talking to the man they are looking for." He blamed his victims, accused them of lying, and showed no remorse. His arrogance electrified the national manhunt. Police plastered his face across newspapers and television broadcasts. Citizens were told to avoid him at all costs. Finally, in October 1995, police tracked him to Johannesburg. When officers closed in, Sithole attacked with a machete, slashing wildly before being and subdued. Even as he bled, he remained eerily calm. During interrogation, Sithole confessed to 38 and 40, though investigators believed the real numbers were much higher. The trial in 1997 became one of the most significant in South African history. Survivors and victims' families packed the courtroom, hoping for closure. Sithole showed almost no emotion. He smirked, he complained, he accused the justice system of framing him. But the evidence, fingerprints, DNA testimonies was overwhelming. The judge called him a man without conscience, without mercy, without humanity. Sithole was sentenced to 2410 years in prison, with no possibility of parole until after 930 years. It remains the longest sentence ever handed down in South Africa. Today he sits behind bars occasionally, granting interviews in which he still refuses to accept responsibility. But the communities he terrorized have never forgotten. For them, the ABC Triangle remains a scar, a reminder that even in moments of national celebration, darkness can take root in the most hopeful of places. Moscow in the early 2000s was a city caught between past and future concrete apartment blocks, shadowing, glittering new towers, crowded metro stations, balancing against quiet, lonely parks. One of those parks, Bitsa Park, was a sprawling maze of forests and pathways, where people walked, dogs, played chess, or escaped the noise of the city. But hidden beneath its calm surface was something else entirely. A predator who believed murder wasn't just violence, it was strategy. His name was Alexander Pichushkin, and he wanted to kill 64 people, the same number of squares on a chessboard. He wasn't chasing pleasure, revenge, or chaos. He was chasing completion. Pichushkin was born in 1,974 inches, Moscow's bleak southern district. His father abandoned the family, leaving him to be raised in a cramped Soviet apartment by his mother and grandfather. Shy and anxious, he struggled to fit in. When he was 4 years old, everything changed. He fell off a swing, a violent blow to the head that doctors later said damaged the parts of his brain responsible for impulse control and empathy. After that, something in him shifted. He became more aggressive, more detached, more fascinated by control. His grandfather, the one person he idolized, introduced him to chess. The game became an escape, a world where strategy, not emotion, ruled, where domination was the goal, where the pieces moved exactly where he wanted. So when his grandfather died, Pichushkin's world cracked open again. Grief evolved into rage, loneliness hardened into obsession, and he began killing animals, filming their suffering with a home camera, a dark rehearsal for what would come next. His first known murder happened in 1992. He lured a schoolmate into Bitsa Park, promising to show him a secluded hangout spot. Once deep inside the woods, he struck him in the head with a and threw his body into a sewer pit. Police wrote it off as an accident or robbery gone wrong. Pichushkin returned to his life, blending into the background, an invisible young man with violent fantasies. For almost a decade, he didn't kill, or at least, no killings were discovered. But by the early 2000s, he was ready to begin his project. Not just murder, a campaign of murder, calculated, methodical, progressive. Most of his victims were elderly men he met playing chess at concrete tables in Bitsa Park. He'd share drinks with them, feigning friendship. Then he'd invite them for a walk deeper into the park's hidden areas. Once isolated, he attacked from behind with After he often dropped their bodies into sewer pits or drainage shafts scattered across the park. Sometimes he shoved vodka bottles into their skull wounds, a signature, a mark, a statement. He believed the city wasn't paying attention, that society didn't value these men, and for a long time he was right. In 2001, bodies began to surface around Bitsa Park, in the woods, in abandoned areas, in the drainage system, beneath the ground. People whispered about a killer, but Moscow's sprawl made it nearly impossible to connect the dots. To investigators, the deaths looked like unrelated tragedies, fights, robberies, accidents. But Pichushkin wasn't improvising. He was keeping score. At home, police later found a chessboard. On it, each square represented a victim. He filled in squares after every kill, determined to reach 64. By 200649, squares were marked. The case finally cracked because of a woman named Marina Moskalyova. She had told her son she was going for a walk with Sasha, Pichushkin's nickname. When she didn't return, her son reported her missing. Police retrieved surveillance footage from her apartment building. It showed Marina walking out the door with Pichushkin. Days later, her body was found in Bitsa Park. And suddenly everything made sense. When investigators entered Pichushkin's apartment, the chessboard on his table was almost full. He had recorded names, dates, and details, a meticulous ledger of death. He confessed without hesitation, not because he regretted anything, but because he wanted recognition for the full scale of his plan. A life without murder, he said, is like a life without food. He claimed he wanted 64 victims, one for each square. He insisted he wasn't finished. "You stopped me," he told police. His trial in 2007 captivated the nation. He sat in a thick glass cage, the enclosure reserved for Russia's most dangerous criminals, expressionless as prosecutors listed the victims. When a psychiatrist suggested he might have been mentally ill, Pichushkin exploded, insisting, "I was fully aware of what I was doing." He was convicted of 49 murders, though investigators believe the real number is higher. He received a life sentence, the harshest penalty available in Russia, with the first 15 years in solitary confinement. Even now, decades later, he shows no remorse. In interviews, he still describes his murders with the coldness of a strategist analyzing moves on a board. In 2025, authorities announced that Pichushkin was preparing to confess to 11 additional murders from the early 1,992 cases, long considered unsolved. If confirmed, his victim count may exceed 60. To him, murder was not chaos. It was order. It was structure. It was a chess match where he believed he alone controlled life and death. The only reason the game ended was because he was captured before he could fill the final row. When we think of evil, we picture shadows, dark alleys, places we don't walk alone. But the stories of these 10 killers reveal a truth far more haunting. Evil does not always hide in darkness. Sometimes it wears a uniform. Sometimes it tends a garden. Sometimes it sits politely at a chess table or smiles from behind a hospital mask. Each of these men moved through life unnoticed, blending into crowds, passing as neighbors, colleagues, even protectors. They didn't look like monsters. They looked like everyone else. But inside them lived a hunger that could not be seen, only measured by the lives they destroyed. Mikhail Popkov patrolled the streets he was supposed to defend, turning police power into predation. Israel Keyes engineered invisibility, proving that silence can be deadlier than chaos. Robert Hansen used Alaska's beauty as a burial ground, hunting women as if they were prey. Bruce MacArthur hid bodies beneath blooming flowers, disguising horror beneath the most ordinary things. Ahmed Siraji weaponized belief itself, twisting superstition into ritual murder. Anatoly Onoprienko ravaged families, erasing entire bloodlines in a single night. Yang Xinhai drifted across rural China, leaving devastation wherever he passed. Niels Hogel betrayed the ultimate trust, the trust of the dying, to feed his need for applause. Moses Sithole preyed on hope in a country trying to heal. Alexander Pichushkin treated life like a game board, convinced he controlled every move. Different countries, different motives, different methods. But the same chilling pattern. They were ordinary men who decided other people's lives belonged to them. And because of that, the worlds around them were forever changed. Families broke, communities trembled, nations asked themselves how such monsters could walk so easily among them. But the real lesson is not about the killers. It's about the illusion they shattered. We want to believe we can recognize danger. We want to believe evil has a face. We want to believe we would know. But these 10 stories show us something uncomfortable, something we'd rather not admit. The most terrifying monsters don't hide in forests or nightmares. They sit beside us on buses. They ring up our groceries. They fix our gardens. They protect our neighborhoods. They wear smiles instead of masks. Evil isn't always loud. Sometimes it is quiet, patient, methodical. And that is what makes it so terrifying. Yet even in that darkness, one truth shines through. Evil does not win. Every one of these men was exposed. Every one was stopped. Every one faced consequences for the destruction they caused. Because in the end, justice has a way of finding what hides. And as long as these stories continue to be told, as long as we remember the victims, not just the killers, as long as we refuse to look away, their darkness will never overpower the light that survived them. This documentary was not just about murder. It was about warning signs, missed systems that failed communities that fought back, and the resilience of those left behind. You never truly know the lives people lead behind closed doors, but you can choose to honor the ones who didn't survive by understanding what happened, by learning from the past, and by refusing to let these stories disappear into silence. Because silence is where monsters grow, and telling the truth is how we stop them.